made clear, no need to fear. Stay tuned, your mind expands today. Summa Made Simple, learn in a fun way.
Welcome to another episode of Summa Made Simple. A few days ago, I was engaged in a debate on a WhatsApp group for writers, screenwriters, fiction writers, etc. And the topic of discussion was cancel culture and how people allow their feelings to overwhelm them, and then they cancel people, and they don't want artists and writers to be free to express themselves. Everyone has to be politically correct, that sort of thing. That was a debate. And then there's something which one of the people on the group said, which really struck me. He said, "Now you know why I hate emotions and feelings. Such useless things. Seriously, they should be optional. If one does not find them necessary, you just uninstall them yourself." That's what this episode is about. It's about let's call it a heresy. There's a heresy going around. There's been going around for centuries now, that emotions are completely useless. They are dangerous. We should get rid of them. We should have nothing to do with them. Now, here's the thing. The reason why I say it's a heresy, okay, let me backtrack. I remember even when I was in high school, our religion teacher used to tell us that the reason he hates novels and he hates fiction is because fiction stirs the emotions. Now, at that time, I used to love reading books, still do. I used to love writing, still do. And it never really quite sat right with me. It's like, fiction is just like terrible, like, because it stirs the emotions. Like, what's wrong with that? And I didn't really have an answer for him up until many years later when, I started reading the Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas, and he actually tackles this question of the role of emotions in our lives. Why do I say that saying emotions are just in and of themselves terrible and horrible is a heresy, meaning an error, an erroneous teaching? Well, God never creates anything uselessly. And if God created emotions and gave them to human beings, they must have a purpose. He wouldn't just there's nothing God creates which is inherently evil in and of itself. And God created emotions and gave them to us. So emotions can't be inherently evil in and of themselves. But there are nuances. There are nuances to what emotions are and how we're supposed to deal with them. And I think that's the reason why over the centuries, so many people have looked down on emotions or have advocated the suppression of emotions. And why this matters, why the question of emotions matters to the man on the street, is because, okay, I'd say it's rather obvious to anyone why letting your emotions run wild and just letting them go loose is a bad idea. Like, you can just cause a lot of harm and a lot of damage, right? If you let, for instance, your anger just take control, or your lust take control. Like, if you let those emotions just take control and run wild, you're going to destroy your life and a lot of other people's lives. Having said that, though, there's also the other extreme, which is more now, let's say, the extreme which many people associate with religion, especially organized religion, especially Catholicism, which is that it's a very cold, hard, unfeeling thing. It's a cold, hard, unfeeling religion. We don't express our emotions, even when you go to church, even when there's no, everything's very cold and calm and controlled. And that's a good thing, kind of a Puritan view on the emotions. That is also, both of those extremes are actually erroneous teachings. They're actually heresies. Why are they heresies? And that is the question that we shall go into today in the 10th article on fortitude, where St. Thomas asks whether the brave man makes use of anger in his action. I asked a question which I didn't answer. I asked a question, why should this matter to the man in the street? The suppression of emotions. It's rather obvious why just letting them loose is a bad idea. But why is it a bad idea to suppress them also? To act as though they're terrible things that have to be squashed all the time, no matter what? Many years ago, I remember I knew a young man whose mother suffered from cancer. And he prayed, and he was a very spiritual young man. He prayed a lot, and then his mother eventually died. And I remember going to the funeral, and all through that whole ordeal, I never ever saw this guy crying. It was, he was what you call that, stoic kind of guy. And like, wow, okay, impressive, pretty manly guy, pretty strong guy. A few months later, he went on a spiritual retreat. Now, a spiritual retreat, a silent retreat, is a period where you sit down with those thoughts which perhaps you've been avoiding, perhaps you've not wanted to confront, and you just sit down with them and you confront them. And he had a serious nervous breakdown. And all the grief that he had been suppressing, all the sadness, everything came out, and he just started screaming and shouting, and he had to be taken back home. And it was from there, it was a downward spiral from there, and his story ended in tragedy. This is why the suppression of emotions matters to you and I, the ordinary person on the street. Suppressing our emotions can be just as destructive as letting them loose. It can destroy our lives and the lives of many other people. I mean, just ask someone who says, I grew up with a father who was emotionally absent. He was always cold and distant, never showed us any affection, never showed us any attention, etc. And there are many people who carry that pain and hurt with them. That's an example of how the suppression of emotion can actually hurt other people. Anyway, sorry, I digress. I am running out of time because this is supposed to be 15 minutes. Let's get into this article. Whether the brave man makes use of anger in his actions. Now, first, St. Thomas lists the objections. It seems that the brave man does not use anger in his actions, for no one should employ as an instrument of his action that which he cannot use at will. Now, man cannot use anger at will, so as to take it up and lay it aside when he will. That makes sense as an objection. And I won't run through the other objections, but I'll go straight to the section where St. Thomas gives the answer, because that's where the meat and the potatoes of this whole issue is. I answer that. This is where he sheds light on why the emotions are important. Then he gives the context, right? As stated above, concerning anger and the other passions or emotions, there was a difference of opinion between the Peripatetics and the Stoics. Now, give you some context. The Peripatetics and the Stoics were, have you ever heard the term school of thought? The term school of thought comes from ancient Greece, where you literally had these schools where people would go and follow a certain philosopher who thought in a certain way. And these philosophers obviously had differences in thoughts and opinion. And so you'd have one school of thought that follows this guy, another school of thought that follows that thinking of that other guy, etc. So amongst them, you had the Peripatetics, that was one school of thought, the Stoics, that was another school of thought. There are some others like the Skeptics, that was another school of thought, the Epicureans, that was another school of thought. So the different schools of thought. So that's what he's referring to, the Peripatetics and the Stoics. For the Stoics, excluded anger and all other passions of the soul from the mind of a wise or good man, whereas the Peripatetics, of whom Aristotle was the chief, ascribed to virtuous men both anger and the other passions of the soul, albeit modified by reason. That's very important. We'll get this shortly, why it's important. And possibly they differed not in reality, but in their way of speaking. For the Peripatetics, as stated above, gave the name of passions to all the movements of the sensitive appetite, however they may comport themselves. What does he mean by movements of the sensitive appetite? So the word appetite, when Aquinas uses it and when classical philosophers use it, refers to any desire that moves us towards something. So sensitive appetites refers to desires that we feel within our senses or as a result of our senses, basically the emotions, because the emotions are reactions of what is perceived, reactions to what is perceived by the senses. For the Peripatetics, as stated above, gave the name of passions to all the movements of the sensitive appetite, however they may comport themselves. And since the sensitive appetite is moved by the command of reason, so that it may cooperate by rendering action more prompt, they held that virtuous persons should employ both anger and other passions of the soul, modified according to the dictate of reason. On the other hand, the Stoics gave the name of passions to certain immoderate emotions of the sensitive appetite, wherefore they called them sicknesses or diseases, and for this reason severed them altogether from virtue. Let's break this down. Let's try and explain what he means here. What he means is, and since the sensitive appetite is moved by the command of reason so that it may cooperate by rendering action more prompt, that's the point. That is the point. That's why God gave us emotions. That's why emotions exist. Emotions allow us to perform good actions more promptly. think of it as having a turbocharger in your engine. If you've got a normal engine in your car and you push down the accelerator, yeah, you take off. If you've got turbo, you really take off, right? Emotions are like turbo in our engine. When we see something that we want to do, and then the emotion is there, the emotion can help. It's supposed to help us to do the thing which in our reason and in our will we have deemed is a good thing to do. A very good example of this from the Bible is, do you remember that instance where there was this woman who was a publicly known sinner? And then Jesus Christ had gone to a Pharisee's house named Simon, and then he sat down at the meal, and then this woman came and she was carrying a jar of ointment, and she knelt down behind him, and then she started weeping and soaking his feet in her tears and wiping them with her hair, and she anointed him with the oil. And then the Pharisee, Simon, was like, oh, if he knew the kind of woman this woman was, oh my goodness, he'd never let her touch him. And then he says, Simon, you remember I came in, you didn't wash my hands, you didn't greet me, you didn't give me a kiss, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. This woman has done all of these things because of her sorrow. Now, think of that woman before she entered that place. She was probably like freaking out. She was like, oh my God, those are Pharisees in there. Those are such righteous people. They're going to judge me so hard. Am I out of my mind? What will the guards at the gate say? Will they even let me in? Of course, there was those fears. But on the other hand, there was sorrow for her sins and a sense of contrition. That's another emotion. And that emotion pushed her to overcome her fear and to do the right thing. I mean, I wish I could have that depth of emotion, of sorrow for my sins as that woman had, because you can see like that it pushed her to such a stage that she was actually able to have her actions recorded for the rest of history in the Bible. That's the role of the emotions. They push us to do the right thing. And I think that's why, for instance, you just find that generally speaking, women for whom the depths of emotions, I get the sense, run far deeper than men. You'll find that women are more likely to be in lines of work or professions which require much higher emotional acumen or depths of emotion, professions that have to do with empathy, compassion, caring, nurturing, whether it's early childhood development education, whether it's nursing, you'll find them there. It's usually women-dominated. Even things like being a receptionist, like front of office situations, you'll usually find they're dominated by women because the depths of their emotions are usually deeper than men, I find. I could be wrong. You can comment in the comments and let me know if you think I'm out of my mind. But I think that's an example of how strong emotions can assist us in doing something which is good. I mean, typical example which I think happens between men and women across the board. I mean, when you see a baby, when you see a cute little baby, right? The thing that your mind tells you is this baby should be looked after, should be protected, should be taken care of, should be fed, should be clothed, should be kept warm, etc., etc. But then at the same time, so those are rational things. But at the same time, you've got the emotion that arises. Oh, such a cute little baby. Look at those cheeks. Oh, so cute. And that emotion helps you to overcome any thing which could have stood in your way of not looking after that kid. Maybe they're noisy. Maybe they're smelly. Maybe they're whatever. Maybe they're sick. And then that whole thought of, okay, but actually, they're a baby and they're still cute and they're still lovable and they're still cute and cuddly and okay. Got to look after them. So the emotions are not in themselves terrible things. They're not in themselves bad things. When they're guided by reason, they actually assist us to do the thing which we want to do. So that's the role of the emotions. And that's why it's a bit of a heresy to say that all emotions are terrible and we should shut them down and we should cut them out and have nothing to do with them. Heresy in 2 points. Number one, it's saying that something which God created and gave us is evil, which is not true. And second, it's just a complete misunderstanding of their role. So what are some practical conclusions of this? Practical conclusions, I would say, is to train yourself to acknowledge emotions, to understand what emotions one is feeling, and then to weigh them up in your mind, like, this emotion that I'm feeling right now, what should I do with it? Should I give it expression? And if I should give it expression, in what way should I express it? Should I express it to this extreme or that extreme? Should I not express it at all? Is this the right time and the place to express it? Is this the right means to express it? I think all of that is part of developing a very healthy relationship with our emotions. And it's what, in pop psychology, I don't know if it's pop psychology, but it's what's called emotional intelligence, I think, to a certain degree. And that's why this question matters for the man on the street, to understand that your emotions are only good or bad insofar as they are or are not guided by your thinking. So in other words, we have to think through our emotions if we want to achieve a good level of satisfaction and happiness in our day-to-day lives. Thanks for listening to this episode. Catch you next time.
Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, stay bright. Summa Made Simple, your guide to light. Catch the next lesson, your journey starts. Summa Made Simple, knowledge in your heart.